Greetings, Neo-Swedenborgians. Okay, yesterday I read chapter 2 of Howard Storm's testimony, and now I'm going to read chapter 1. And I'm going to point out some things, how it fits into this Neo-Swedenborgianistic framework. So, he's in intense agony, and he's on his deathbed. The story starts, he says, this is his Howard Storm speaking. He says, struggling to say goodbye to my wife, I wrestled with my emotions. Telling her that I loved her very much was as much of a goodbye as I could utter because of my emotional distress. Sort of relaxing and closing my eyes, I waited for the end. This was it, I felt. This was the big nothing, the big blackout, the one you never wake up from, the end of existence. I had absolute certainty that there was nothing beyond this life, because that was how really smart people understood it. While I was undergoing this stress, prayer or anything like that never occurred to me. I never once thought about it. If I mentioned God's name at all, it was only as a profanity. For a time, there was a sense of being unconscious or asleep. I'm not sure how long it lasted, but I felt really strange and I opened my eyes. To my surprise, I was standing next to the bed, and I was looking at my body laying in the bed. My first reaction was, this is crazy. I can't be standing here looking down at myself. That's not possible. That wasn't what I expected. This wasn't right. Why was I still alive? I wanted oblivion. Yet I was looking at a thing that was my body, and it just didn't have much meaning to me. Not knowing what was happening, I became upset. I started yelling and screaming at my wife, and she just sat there like a stone. She didn't look at me, she didn't move, and I kept screaming profanities to get her to pay attention. Being confused, upset, and angry, I tried to get the attention of my roommate with the same result. He didn't react. I wanted this to be a dream, and I kept saying to myself, this has got to be a dream. But I knew it wasn't a dream. I became aware that strangely I felt more alert, more aware, more alive than I had ever felt in my entire life. All my senses were extremely acute. Everything felt tingly and alive. The floor was cool, and my bare feet felt moist and clammy. This had to be real. I squeezed my fist and was amazed at how much I was feeling in my hands just by making a fist. Then I heard my name. I heard Howard, come here. Wondering at first where it was coming from, I discovered that it was originating in the doorway. There were different voices calling me. I asked who they were, and they said, we are here to take care of you. We'll fix you up. Come with us. Asking again who they were, I asked them if they were doctors and nurses. They responded, come, quick, see, you'll find out. As I asked them questions, they gave evasive answers. They kept giving me a sense of urgency, insisting that I should step through the doorway. With some reluctance, I stepped into the hallway, and in the hallway I was in a fog or a haze. It was a light-colored haze. It wasn't a heavy haze. I could see my hand, for example, but the people who were calling me were 15 or 20 feet ahead, and I couldn't see them clearly. They were more like silhouettes or shapes, and as I moved toward them, they backed off in the haze. As I tried to get close to them to identify them, they quickly withdrew deeper into the fog. So I had to follow them into the fog deeper and deeper. These strange beings kept urging me to come with them. I repeatedly asked them where we were going, and they responded, hurry up, you'll find out. They wouldn't answer anything. The only response was insisting that I hurry up and follow them. They told me repeatedly that my pain was meaningless and unnecessary. Pain is bullshit, they said. I knew that we had been traveling for miles, but I occasionally had the strange ability to look back and see the hospital room. My body was still lying there motionless in the bed. My perspective at these times was as if I were floating above the room looking down. It seemed millions and millions of miles away. Looking back into the room, I saw my wife and my roommate, and I decided that they had not been able to help me, so I would go with these people. Walking for what seemed to be a considerable distance, these beings were all around me. They were leading me through the haze. I don't know how long. There was a real sense of timelessness about the experience. In a real sense, I am unaware of how long it was, but it felt like a long time, maybe even days or weeks. As we traveled, the fog got thicker and darker, and the people began to change. At first they seemed rather playful and happy, but when we had covered some distance, a few of them began to get aggressive. The more questioning and suspicious I was, the more antagonistic and rude and authoritarian they became. They began to make jokes about my bare rear end, which wasn't covered by my hospital gown, and how pathetic I was. I knew they were talking about me, but when I tried to find out exactly what they were saying, they would say, "Shh, he can hear you, he can hear you." Then others would seem to caution the aggressive ones. It seemed that I could hear them warn the aggressive ones to be careful or I would be frightened away. Wondering what was happening, I continued to ask questions, and they repeatedly urged me to hurry and stop asking questions. Feeling uneasy, especially since they continued to get aggressive, I considered returning, but I didn't know how to get back. I was lost. There were no features that I could relate to. There was just fog and the wet, clammy ground, and I had no sense of direction. All my communication with them took place verbally, just as ordinary human communication does. They didn't appear to know what I was thinking, and I didn't know what they were thinking. What was increasingly obvious was that they were liars, and help was farther away the more I stayed with them. Hours ago I had hoped to die and end the torment of life. Now things were worse, as I was forced by a mob of unfriendly and cruel people towards some unknown destination in the darkness. They began shouting and hurling insults at me, demanding that I hurry along, and they refused to answer any question. Finally, I told them I wouldn't go any further. At that time, they changed completely. They became much more aggressive and insisted that I was going with them. A number of them began to push and shove me, and I responded by hitting back at them. A wild orgy of frenzied taunting, screaming, and hitting ensued. I fought like a wild man. All the while it was obvious that they were having great fun. It seemed to be almost a game for them, with me as the centerpiece of their amusement. My pain became their pleasure. They seemed to want to make me hurt by clawing and biting at me. Whenever I would get one off me, there were 5 more to replace the one. By this time it was almost complete darkness, and I had the sense that instead of there being 20 or 30, there were an innumerable host of them. Each one seemed set on coming in for the sport they got from hurting me. My attempts to fight back only provoked greater merriment. They began to physically humiliate me in the most degrading ways. As I continued to fight on and on, I was aware that they weren't in any hurry to win. They were playing with me just as a cat plays with a mouse. Every new assault brought howls of cacophony. Then at some point they began to tear off pieces of my flesh. To my horror, I realized I was being taken apart and eaten alive slowly so that their entertainment would last as long as possible. At no time did I ever have any sense that the beings who seduced and attacked me were anything other than human beings. The best way I can describe them is to think of the worst imaginable person stripped of every impulse to do good. Some of them seemed to be able to tell others what to do, but I had no sense of any structure or hierarchy in an organizational sense. They didn't appear to be controlled or directed by anyone. Basically, they were a mob of beings totally driven by unbridled cruelty and passions. During our struggle, I noticed that they seemed to feel no pain. Other than that, they appeared to possess no special non-human or superhuman abilities. Although during my initial experience with them, I assumed that they were clothed. In our intimate physical contact, I never felt any clothing whatsoever. fighting well and hard for a long time. Ultimately, I was spent. Lying there exhausted among them, they began to calm down, since I was no longer the amusement that I had been. Most of the beings gave up in disappointment because I was no longer amusing, but a few still picked and gnawed at me and ridiculed me for no longer being any fun. By this time, I had been pretty much taken apart. People were still picking at me occasionally, and I just lay there, all torn up, unable to resist. I'm going to stop there. And because yesterday I read what comes next. And I want to point out, because I only have 3 minutes left, I want to point out that something that happens next, which I talked about yesterday, which is this, they see a little dot of light off in the distance. The dot of light, the point of light. He sees a point of light. And either it comes towards him or he goes towards it. And it turns into a tunnel, and then they take the tunnel into the land of the city of light, or the world of bright, loving light. And I want to point out one little thing, and which is that the point of light is always up in the sky somewhere. You hear this point of light and the tunnel of light, and as I've said before, if we're going to take these people just at their word and listen to their little story and organize the information in these stories, there's a piece of information which is that where's the tunnel and which way does it go? And as far as I know, I've read a whole bunch of these. The tunnel is always up there somewhere. It goes over there. It's up in the sky. I was floating in my hospital room. I saw a tunnel and I went towards it. Right. And so I'm using this to back up the claim which I've made, which is that the Van Allen belts are heaven. And the first piece of evidence I used for this is the map in J. Hewitt Mackenzie's book Spirit Intercourse, which is an extremely flimsy piece of evidence, I know, but it's also strangely miraculous. How did it come about is a real question. And so now the second piece of evidence is this Howard Storm and everybody else who sees a tunnel of light in the sky. Well, that supports the case that they're going up in the sky somewhere. So what I'm saying, neo-Swedenborgianistically, is that when you die, you move into the sky. And it may be just a hyper-convincing illusion, but then you're left with the question, well, what's the difference between reality and a hyper-convincing illusion? If this illusion this reality could be an illusion, and the next reality is even more convincing than this, well, all that is a more convincing illusion, which, how do you differentiate a hyper-convincing illusion from reality? Especially when you're in the theater of your own mind, right? That's the question that Neo-Swedenborgianism leads you to. And the answer to me is that you can't. And so it is essentially, even if it's a product of language acquisition, as I've said, you're still stuck in it. And so this moving into the sky when you die is something that is on everyone's horizon, right? And so, one more thing, 14 minutes. This picture of the angels in the clouds, the Van Allen belts are actually above the clouds. So the Van Allen belts, or J. Hewitt Mackenzie's map at least, starts at about 400 miles above Earth, while the clouds and all the weather and the wind and all that is below 400 miles. So these images of the angels in the clouds are not Neo-Swedenborgian. And what we're saying is that the angels are actually way above the clouds, thousands of miles above the clouds, in the sky, in the Van Allen belts. So the Van Allen belts are heaven to us Neo-Swedenborgians. All right? Thanks. See ya.